सिक्सर।
ये फुटबॉल है, क्रिकेट नहीं।
नो, क्रिकेट है, क्रिकेट।
क्रिकेट का एक्सपर्ट मैं हूँ।
सीलिंग शॉट जानते हो?
हेलीकॉप्टर शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट नहीं।
नो, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट, एक स्ट्रोक में सब कुछ ब्राइट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट।
इंडिगो,
देखा कितना ब्राइट।
धोनी भाई 2-2 ट्रॉफीज।
बेस्ट कैच और मैन ऑफ द मैच दोनों।
तब तो मेरा भी फोटो आना चाहिए।
हाँ, बैड फील्डर एंड वर्स्ट बैट्समैन।
अपने फील्ड में मैं भी 2 का चैंपियन हूँ, डर्ट प्रूफ और वाटर प्रूफ। इंडिया का पहला पेंट जो धूल मिट्टी और पानी दोनों को रोके। इंडिगो डर्ट प्रूफ एंड वाटर प्रूफ एक्सटीरियर लैमिनेट। इंडिगो।
धीरे,
अरे टेंशन नहीं धोनी भाई,
संभल।
धोनी भाई मैं ठीक हूँ।
अरे तू नहीं, मेरा फ्लोर।
फ्लोर भी ठीक है। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट, सब कुछ सहे, सालों साल चले। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट। इंडिगो। अब तुम्हारी बाइक पे। धोनी भाई रुको तो।
मैं हूँ रंगीला। धोनी भाई क्या कर रहे हो?
गेस करो।
ट्रॉफी चमका रहे हो, बट इट्स नॉट चमकिंग, नॉट चमकिंग।
अब
नो 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 नो।
अब
नो।
प्रभु, आपके दृष्टिकोण में चमक किसे कहते हैं?
बालक किसे?
शानदार चमक के लिए कोई रेगुलर नहीं, इंडिगो PU एनामल ही लगाएं।
इंडिगो PU एनामल।
इंडिगो,
चमकिंग चमकिंग चमकिंग।
इससे छुटकारा कैसे पाएं?
डबल पकड़ वाले से छुटकारा इम्पॉसिबल। डबल पकड़ वाली इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी, जिसका स्पेशल पॉलीमर दीवार और पेंट दोनों को पकड़ के रखे, ताकि पेंट सालों साल निखरता रहे।
इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी। वाओ, ये है असली शाइन।
नहीं धोनी भाई नहीं, बाहर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी है।
अंदर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी।
नो 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 नो, बाहर वाली।
और इस मैच का विनर है इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लेमिनेट। दीवारों को दे बढ़िया शाइन, अंदर भी बाहर भी।
इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लैमिनेट।
सिक्सर।
ये फुटबॉल है, क्रिकेट नहीं।
नो, क्रिकेट है, क्रिकेट।
क्रिकेट का एक्सपर्ट मैं हूँ।
सीलिंग शॉट जानते हो?
हेलीकॉप्टर शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट नहीं।
नो, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट, एक स्ट्रोक में सब कुछ ब्राइट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट।
इंडिगो,
देखा कितना ब्राइट।
धोनी भाई 2-2 ट्रॉफीज।
बेस्ट कैच और मैन ऑफ द मैच दोनों।
तब तो मेरा भी फोटो आना चाहिए।
हाँ, बैड फील्डर एंड वर्स्ट बैट्समैन।
अपने फील्ड में मैं भी 2 का चैंपियन हूँ, डर्ट प्रूफ और वाटर प्रूफ। इंडिया का पहला पेंट जो धूल मिट्टी और पानी दोनों को रोके। इंडिगो डर्ट प्रूफ एंड वाटर प्रूफ एक्सटीरियर लैमिनेट। इंडिगो।
धीरे,
अरे टेंशन नहीं धोनी भाई,
संभल।
धोनी भाई मैं ठीक हूँ।
अरे तू नहीं, मेरा फ्लोर।
फ्लोर भी ठीक है। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट, सब कुछ सहे, सालों साल चले। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट। इंडिगो। अब तुम्हारी बाइक पे। धोनी भाई रुको तो।
मैं हूँ रंगीला। धोनी भाई क्या कर रहे हो?
गेस करो।
ट्रॉफी चमका रहे हो, बट इट्स नॉट चमकिंग, नॉट चमकिंग।
अब
नो 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 नो।
अब
नो।
प्रभु, आपके दृष्टिकोण में चमक किसे कहते हैं?
बालक किसे?
शानदार चमक के लिए कोई रेगुलर नहीं, इंडिगो PU एनामल ही लगाएं।
इंडिगो PU एनामल।
इंडिगो,
चमकिंग चमकिंग चमकिंग।
इससे छुटकारा कैसे पाएं?
डबल पकड़ वाले से छुटकारा इम्पॉसिबल। डबल पकड़ वाली इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी, जिसका स्पेशल पॉलीमर दीवार और पेंट दोनों को पकड़ के रखे, ताकि पेंट सालों साल निखरता रहे।
इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी। वाओ, ये है असली शाइन।
नहीं धोनी भाई नहीं, बाहर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी है,
अंदर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी।
नो 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 नो, बाहर वाली।
और इस मैच का विनर है इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लेमिनेट। दीवारों को दे बढ़िया शाइन, अंदर भी बाहर भी।
इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लैमिनेट।
सिक्सर।
ये फुटबॉल है, क्रिकेट नहीं।
नो, क्रिकेट है क्रिकेट।
क्रिकेट का एक्सपर्ट मैं हूँ।
सीलिंग शॉट जानते हो?
हेलीकॉप्टर शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट नहीं।
नो 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 नो, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट, एक स्ट्रोक में सब कुछ ब्राइट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट।
इंडिगो।
देखा कितना ब्राइट।
धोनी भाई दो ट्रॉफीज।
बेस्ट कैच और मैन ऑफ द मैच दोनों।
तब तो मेरा भी फोटो आना चाहिए।
हाँ, बैड फील्डर एंड वर्स्ट बैट्समैन।
अपने फील्ड में मैं भी 2 का चैंपियन हूँ, डर्ट प्रूफ और वाटर प्रूफ। इंडिया का पहला पेंट जो धूल मिट्टी और पानी दोनों को रोके। इंडिगो डर्ट प्रूफ एंड वाटर प्रूफ एक्सटीरियर लैमिनेट। इंडिगो।
धीरे,
अरे टेंशन नहीं धोनी भाई,
संभल।
धोनी भाई मैं ठीक हूँ।
अरे तू नहीं, मेरा फ्लोर।
फ्लोर भी ठीक है। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट, सब कुछ सहे, सालों साल चले। इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट। इंडिगो। अब तुम्हारी बाइक पे। धोनी भाई रुको तो।
मैं हूँ रंगीला। धोनी भाई क्या कर रहे हो?
गेस करो।
ट्रॉफी चमका रहे हो, बट इट्स नॉट चमकिंग, नॉट चमकिंग।
अब
नो 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 नो
अब
नो।
प्रभु, आपके दृष्टिकोण में चमक किसे कहते हैं?
बालक किसे?
शानदार चमक के लिए कोई रेगुलर नहीं, इंडिगो PU एनामल ही लगाएं।
इंडिगो PU एनामल।
इंडिगो।
चमकिंग चमकिंग।
इससे छुटकारा कैसे पाएं?
डबल पकड़ वाले से छुटकारा इम्पॉसिबल। डबल पकड़ वाली इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी, जिसका स्पेशल पॉलीमर दीवार और पेंट दोनों को पकड़ के रखे, ताकि पेंट सालों साल निखरता रहे।
इंडिगो पॉलीमर पुट्टी। वाओ, ये है असली शाइन।
नहीं धोनी भाई नहीं, बाहर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी है,
अंदर वाली ज्यादा शाइनी।
नो 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 नो, बाहर वाली।
और इस मैच का विनर है इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लेमिनेट। दीवारों को दे बढ़िया शाइन, अंदर भी बाहर भी।
इंडिगो एक्रेलिक लैमिनेट।
सिक्सर।
ये फुटबॉल है, क्रिकेट नहीं।
नो, क्रिकेट है क्रिकेट।
क्रिकेट का एक्सपर्ट मैं हूँ।
सीलिंग शॉट जानते हो?
हेलीकॉप्टर शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट नहीं।
नो 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 नो, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट, सीलिंग शॉट मेरा शॉट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट, एक स्ट्रोक में सब कुछ ब्राइट।
इंडिगो ब्राइट सीलिंग पेंट।
इंडिगो।
देखा कितना ब्राइट।
धोनी भाई दो ट्रॉफीज।
बेस्ट कैच और मैन ऑफ द मैच दोनों।
तब तो मेरा भी फोटो आना चाहिए।
हाँ, बैड फील्डर एंड वर्स्ट बैट्समैन।
अपने फील्ड में मैं भी 2 का चैंपियन हूँ, डर्ट प्रूफ और वाटर प्रूफ। इंडिया का पहला पेंट जो धूल मिट्टी और पानी दोनों को रोके। इंडिगो डर्ट प्रूफ एंड वाटर प्रूफ एक्सटीरियर लैमिनेट। इंडिगो।
धीरे,
अरे टेंशन नहीं धोनी भाई,
संभल।
यार धोनी भाई, मैं ठीक हूँ।
अरे तू नहीं, मेरा फ्लोर।
फ्लोर भी ठीक है।
इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट, सब कुछ सहे, सालों साल चले।
इंडिगो फ्लोर पेंट।
इंडिगो।
अब तुम्हारी बाइक पे। धोनी भाई रुको तो।
Good evening, everyone. Speaking on behalf of Indigo Paints, I'm Lalit Jaising from Concept PR and your moderator for this virtual brokers and analyst event. I would take this opportunity to thank you for taking out time from your busy schedules to join us. We appreciate your presence and extend a very warm welcome to all of you. The objective of today's live session is to understand Indigo Paint's interest in raising finance via an initial public offering and what they do as a business organization. Under a normal circumstance, this would have been an on-ground event, but we all are increasingly getting accustomed to the safer and more convenient format of attending and conducting the roadshow. We hope you gather the same or a better experience from the comfort of your home or office. Before I review the functionality of the webinar, I would like to bring to light that since the inception of the company and over the past decade, the company has grown at almost a 40% CAGR, way ahead of the top four competitors in the decorative paints industry, giving light to its bait and switch strategy. It has gained an early mover advantage driven by its differentiated product offerings in the market. Moving ahead, you will be kept on mute throughout the event and all questions will be answered via the Q&A chat box only, where you can type your question in session or at the end of the webinar. Would request all participants to please limit yourselves to 3 questions if possible and use a lowercase font when typing the question. If we miss any of your questions, don't worry. You can email us at ipoteam@conceptpr.com and we will try to be swift in responding back to you. Going forward, it's a great pleasure to introduce the speakers of today. From the company, we have Mr. Hemant Jalan, Chairman and Managing Director, Mr. Chetan Umane, Chief Financial Officer, Mr. T.S. Suresh Babu, Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Sri Hari Santakumar, DGM Finance. The representation from the bankers are Mr. Abhijit Vaidya, Executive Director, Co-Head Equity Corporate Finance, Kotak Mahindra Capital Company, Mr. Satyan Shah, Head Investment Banking, Edelweiss Financial Services Limited, and Mr. Sumit Bagri, Vice President, Corporate Finance, ICICI Securities Limited. On behalf of the company and the lead managers to the issue, let me thank all participants for being a part of this session. And I now invite Mr. Satyan Shah from Edelweiss Financial Services to deliver the opening remark and commence this Brokers and Analysts Conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Lalit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you for the analyst and broker meet of Indigo Paints. It's a matter of great pride for us to bring to you the IPO of Indigo Paints, the first paints company to go public in India in over 30 years. The company started off with humble beginnings in the year 2000, and from there, through sheer hard work, innovation, never say die attitude, has reached a stage where it is today amongst the top 5 and the fastest growing decorative paint companies in India. A sector which has otherwise been dominated by very, very large incumbent strong players. It's very rare to find a promoter who is so detail oriented and hands-on in every aspect of the business. It's been our absolute pleasure to work with Mr. Jalan and his team, who have been the force behind the phenomenal performance that we have seen over the last few years. The company consistently seeks to launch first to market products by identifying niche product opportunities and introducing products that address these requirements. A few of examples of these are, bright ceiling coat emulsions, tile coat emulsions, metallic emulsions, dirt proof and waterproof exterior laminates, exterior interior acrylic laminates, etc. The company's distribution network comprises over 11,230 active dealers and 40 depots. This, I think, is a very important aspect for a paint company, that market knowledge, financial resources, and time are required to develop such a network in a short period of time. And Indigo Paints has managed to create this super network with a very prudent use of time, cost, and resources. As on September 30, the company had 3 manufacturing facilities, all of them strategically located in proximity to raw material sources, which reduce inward freight costs and resulting in overall reduction of costs of raw materials. We believe the issue provides a unique opportunity to investors to participate in the growth of one of the fastest growing decorative paint companies in India. A few highlights of the issue. The issue opens for subscription on Wednesday, January 20th, and closes on Friday, January 22nd, with the anchor investor being scheduled for Tuesday, 19th of January. The price band for the issue has been fixed at 1488 to 1490, with an issue size of 1169 crores at the top end of the price band. This is a mix of primary and secondary offer. Of the 1169 is broken into those 2 components. With this, I'd like to seek all your support to make this issue a real successful one by participating in the growth story. And I would also like to welcome and invite Hemant to take us through his thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Satyan, for the introduction to the company's initial public offering and the issue's key highlights. I would now request the ever energetic Mr. Hemant Jalan to take us through the organization's journey, the struggles, the victories, subsequently take the attendees through the company's investor presentation to cover its business and financial details, as well as touch upon its key strategies going forward.
Thanks, Lalit. Thanks, Satyan, for the extremely kind words, however undeserved they were. A very, very warm welcome to a very large gathering of both analysts, brokers, individual investors. I believe we have a huge attendance today. I would like to make a very detailed presentation on the company. I think the presentation would answer many of the questions that you may already be having, but I'm sure there will be many other questions that will be left unanswered, which we will take up at the end of the presentation. So with your permission, let me start off. It'll take a second for my screen to start showing. Is the screen visible, Lalit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there are some statutory disclaimer slides in the beginning, which with your permission, I will skip through. If anyone wants a detailed copy of it, please contact Ladit's team at Concept and we'd be happy to mail them to you. The details of the proposed IPO have already been covered by Satyan. I think almost all of these things he has mentioned in his opening remarks, and therefore I will not repeat them, except that the primary portion of the IPO is about 300 crores And the OFS portion comprises the balance 869 crores or so. He's already mentioned the price band. The quota for the individual categories are pretty standard, as is there in just about every issue in the country. And the net proceeds as to where they would be applied, they are mentioned on this slide, but I will be covering them again in the presentation. And as you know, the BRLMs for the issue are Kotak Mahindra, Edelweiss Financial, and ICICI Securities Limited. So we have broken up this presentation into three broad categories. The first is a brief section, kind of like a corporate overview, both about our company and about the sector in which we operate. Then we will have a very detailed analysis of the strategy that Indigo Paints has adopted to succeed in this sector. And then an equally detailed deep dive into our financial performances and comparison of various metrics with the other larger listed players in the industry. So with your permission, I'd like to jump straight away into the overview section. Much of what you see on the first slide are probably things that you're aware of. The decorative paint industry in India was approximately of about 40,000 crores in FY19. It was growing at a steady CAGR of about 11.5% in the 5 preceding years and slated to grow at about a 13% CAGR in the subsequent years. Now, you all know that the sector has been for long an oligopoly of 4 large players, all of whom are very big listed players in the Indian space. In order of size, they are, of course, Asian Paints, Berger, Kansai Nerolac, and Akzo Nobel. And between those 4 players, they have collectively 2/3 of the available market. I think you're also aware that there have been very strong entry barriers in this sector. And people tell us that in the last 50 years or so, we are perhaps the only company to have broken through many of these barriers and getting ready to come into a position to challenge the large players in the future years. The demand for decorative paint itself has been extremely resilient despite ups and downs of the economy over the years. And one of the main reasons is that about 80% of the demand comes from repainting of existing homes, and a much smaller portion comes from new construction. And as far as the repainting cycle in India is concerned, we have witnessed a gradual reduction in the repainting cycle. About 10 years ago, this was averaging around once in 7 to 8 years. And now the average duration before you repaint your house is shortened to once in 4 to 5 years. Naturally, this has led to a big spurt in the demand for the paint. The other interesting thing to note is that today it is the smaller towns and rural areas which account for well over 50% of the aggregate demand in decorative paints. Now, in the light of this backdrop, we are considered the 5th largest decorative paint manufacturer in the country. And amongst the top 5, we are by far the fastest growing by a very wide margin. Today, we have a presence virtually pan-India. The unique thing about us is that more than 28% of our revenue comes from a portfolio of highly differentiated products where we have been the first in the market to launch these products. And for many of these products, we are today the only manufacturer in the country. Yes, we do make the same vanilla regular paints that everyone else makes, but we also make a large portfolio of paints where we think no one else is manufacturing. By and large, our presence has been very good in the smaller towns and rural areas, but that is changing very fast as we expand quickly into the larger cities of the country. During the last 5 or 6 years, we have been stepping up our advertising quite aggressively, and that has led to a fairly high degree of brand salience in a relatively short period of time. And today we are leveraging this brand salience to gradually increase our tinting machine population across the distribution network. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And as Satyan already mentioned, we have 3 manufacturing locations, one in Rajasthan, one in Kerala, and one in Tamil Nadu. And they're all located strategically in very close proximity to the principal raw materials. A little bit about our brief journey over the last 21 years. We started operations under very, very humble environs in April 2000 in a small rented industrial shed in Jodhpur, manufacturing the most basic kind of paint called cement paint, which is a very low-tech paint, primarily manufactured by the small-scale sector. And we were, of course, a very small company at that point in time. The next 6 years, or shall I say the first 6 years of our existence, naturally was a struggle for survival, during which time we gradually diversified our product portfolio to include most water-based paints, the emulsions, the distempers, and the primers, and so on. And by the end of the 6th year, we could afford to buy our own industrial land, set up our own factory, and shift operations there at Jodhpur. Even at the end of the first decade, by FY10, we were of very, very modest size with an annual turnover of in the range of only 17 crores annually and a small footprint in 11 states in India. It is in the last decade, after FY10, that the company has gone on an exponential growth path and things have happened in very quick succession. In FY11, when we were very, very small, we took the courage of implementing SAP. In FY12, we made the first baby steps in the start of advertising. Of course, at that time, all we could afford was the use of some local newspapers and hoardings. A major inflection point came about in FY15 when Sequoia Capital invested 50 crores into our company. And that gave us the courage and the muscle power to escalate our advertising to a national level on television. And that is something that we have gradually intensified ever since for the last 5 or 6 years. A year after Sequoia invested in us, an opportunity came about to acquire another mid-sized paint company, which was based in Kerala, called High Build Coatings, which we did acquire with the aid of another infusion of 90 crores of equity capital by Sequoia, and merged this company seamlessly with ourselves. And this was an excellent acquisition because it not only diversified our manufacturing base from 1 location to 3 locations, but it also served to complete the full range of product portfolio in decorative paints. Over the last 2-3 years, we have been aggressively populating our retail network with our tinting machines, and we will talk a little bit more about that again later. And then in FY19, we took the big plunge of signing on Mr. MS Dhoni as our brand ambassador, and he has, of course, taken our brand equity to a whole different level. The takeaways from this journey are that in the last decade or so, our CAGR in revenue has been close to 42%, which is a little more than 3 times the average industry growth rate during this period. And even in FY20, where all companies were first impacted very heavily by the economic slowdown in the country. And then, of course, in March, when the lockdowns were declared, the bottom fell off and all companies lost a huge amount of top line. And even in this troubled FY20, our revenue growth over and above FY19 was about 16.5%, which, as we shall see later, is significantly more than the larger companies in this sector. And we ended last year with a net revenue from operations of about 625 crores with a very fast rising profitability graph. We have a very robust team as our board of directors. Along with myself, we have Mr. KVN Kutti, who was the founder of that High Build Coatings, the company that we acquired in Kerala, and he has continued on as an executive director. He himself is an engineer and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. We have Mrs. Sakshi Chopra, the Sequoia nominee on the board, who's an MBA from the Asian Institute of Management. And we have 4 very high quality independent directors, all with extremely pedigreed backgrounds in their own respective field, like Mr. Sunil Goyal, who is the former president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Western India, Mr. Praveen Tripathi, who's a very big name in advertising, who's a graduate of both IIT and IIM Ahmedabad, Mr. Ravi Nigam, who again is an MBA from Institute of Rural Management and Harvard, who used to run his own listed company called Tasty Bites, which got sold to Mars Food of USA about 18 months ago, and Ms. Nupur Garg, who has many, many years of experience in the private equity space, who herself is a chartered accountant and an MBA from Sloan School, MIT. Now, having had Sequoia Capital on board our company for now about 6.5 years, and Ernst & Young as our auditors for the similar period, naturally, these two institutions have brought about a very high level of corporate governance within the company, which we are eminently proud of. I would now like to jump into the second section of the presentation, which has to do with the strategy that we have adopted. Now, we mentioned earlier that this paint industry, especially the decorative paint industry, which is dominated by 4 players, has had very strong entry barriers. In our opinion, there are 3 main reasons for the existence of these barriers. The first has to do with the difficulty in establishing the kind of distribution network which the sector demands. The second has to do with the difficulty in building brand equity in a space which has been so inundated with brand building by 4 large players for a very long period of time. And the third barrier is the difficulty in populating your tinting machines across the retail chain. Let us take a minute to understand each one of these barriers in a little more depth. Let us come to the first barrier of distribution network. Now, almost all FMCG companies in India have a 2-tier distribution model. That is, the company supplies to a set of wholesalers or stockists or whatever terminology you may give them. And then each of these wholesalers or stockists in turn services anywhere from 300 to 500 retail outlets. And therefore, if any new FMCG company needs to establish a pan-India distribution network, it really needs to establish a connect with maybe 80 to 100 good stockists spread out over the country. And it gets instantaneous access to 30,000 to 40,000 retail outlets. Unfortunately, this formula has never worked in the paint industry. Because of the very large number of SKUs that we handle, which is more than 3,000 or 4,000, no distributor or stockist is able to do justice to it. And therefore, all paint companies have chosen historically to go the direct route. That is, company straight to the end retailer. Now, if you're talking about establishing a direct connectivity with 20 to 30,000 retail outlets across the country, all of whom are necessarily multi-brand in nature, all of whom need to be made supplies on some kind of a credit terms, and a very large number of them exist in very, very small towns and rural areas, which cannot be ignored because of their very high contribution to the overall demand. You're talking about visiting many thousands of small towns and villages in India to set up such a network. And this is something that takes an enormous amount of time and requires maybe not years of patience, but maybe a few decades of patience to build. The conventional wisdom of starting from large cities and slowly working your way down to the smaller towns and then to the villages also is completely counterproductive in this sector. The reason is that when you are a newer player and your brand is not as well known, your ability to sell in a large city is extremely limited. And the reason is that people in large cities are very, very brand conscious. And when you don't have that brand salience, it is very difficult to sell in a large city. In a small town, where the nature of selling is a little more personalized. There is a slightly greater ability of the retailer to convince the customer to adopt a lesser known brand. And therefore, in our opinion, the right way to build the network in this sector is to start from small towns and rural areas and then work your way up into the larger cities and not the reverse. And incidentally, whenever I have spoken to the old timers in our market leader, Asian Paints, they have confessed that 65 years ago, they had to do exactly the same thing of starting from rural India and small towns and then later moving to the large cities rather than the other way around. So this process becomes a huge barrier to entry because it takes a very long time to build this network. The second barrier to entry has to do with brand building. Now, if you're lucky to be in a category which has traditionally not been heavily advertised, your job is relatively easier. If I may give examples of other companies in other sectors of consumer products, take the example of PVC pipes, which is a very, very old industry, but traditionally never advertised. Until a new brand like Astral Pipes came, did a lot of advertising for 2 years, and is today the market leader. A similar thing happened with Siska LED in the lighting fixtures space. Unfortunately, this luxury is not afforded to us in the paint category because all the 4 large players have spent so much money consistently over 40 years of time to build their brands. And they continue to spend huge amount of money in further strengthening their brand, all of which are deeply entrenched household names, that it becomes very difficult for a new entrant who enters initially with obviously slightly lower ad budgets. How does he outshout the competition? And how does he overcome this overhang of 40 years of brand salience that they have built? It's a very daunting task. The third, and in my opinion, the most difficult barrier to entry in this space has to do with tinting machines. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with tinting machines, let me briefly explain their role in paint sale. Now, in the olden times, if you wanted to buy paints or emulsions to paint either the interiors or the exteriors of your homes, you were offered a shade card with 20 shades and you selected one of them and that paint was delivered. Today, the customer has become spoilt for choice when he is offered a range of 2,000 shades to select from. And the only way in which those shades can be delivered to him is if the retailer has a tinting machine of that company located within the shop. And whatever shade you select, the retailer is able to pick a base paint of that company, tint it instantly to the exact shade and deliver it to you in minutes. So if you want to sell emulsions, and you do want to sell emulsions because that is 50% of the paint market, you need to have tinting machines across your network. Now, the problem here is severely one of space. Most paint retailers in India are very, very small physical establishments overflowing in storage capacity. The large players over the last 20-25 years have done an excellent job of populating the retail network with their brand of tinting machine. And it is very difficult to find a retailer in India today who does not have at least 2 different brands of tinting machine in his shop. And he is very unwilling to install a third machine unless he sees a very strong brand pull coming for your brand. Now, in light of these 3 very difficult barriers, I'll now take you through what strategy Indigo Paints has adopted to overcome them. The first element of our strategy deals with coming up with a range of differentiated products. As I said earlier, yes, we do make the same vanilla products that everyone else makes, the full range of them, but we also make a wide portfolio of products that we think no one else was making. Way back in 2005, we launched our first differentiated product, metallic emulsion, a paint that you could paint your walls with, which gave either a gold or a silver or a copper or a bronze finish to your wall. We A couple of years later, we came up with a specialized paint for the ceiling, for the roof tiles. You know, there are parts of India in Kerala or Goa or Mangalore where practically every house is cladded with these terracotta roof tiles on a sloping roof at the top. And normally people were accustomed to using regular exterior emulsion to paint these tiles. And we came up with a very specialized paint, specifically designed for the ceiling roof tiles. A bright ceiling coat. Most people use regular white wall paint and paint the ceiling with that. But we realized that a ceiling is not a wall. It has different functionalities and different requirements of a paint. And we came up with a very specialized paint meant exclusively for the ceiling. And the greatest success amongst all these category creator products was from the floor coat emulsion. A unique idea of a paint which you can paint your driveway with, the paver blocks on your driveway, and you can drive a car or a truck on it and it withstands all that. These are products that were categories by themselves that we created. Even amongst large existing categories of paints, like take, for example, the category of enamel. Now, enamel is about 20% of the size of the decorative paint market. Everyone makes the same kind of enamel, which is called a synthetic enamel derived from a soya oil origin. We were the first to come up with an enamel derived from a polyurethane origin, which we called the PU enamel, which offers tremendous value add proposition to the customer in terms of sheen, longevity of that shine, surface coverage area, etc. And today, this PU enamel sells at a very high premium to any other brand of enamel available in the market. Similarly, in the field of emulsions, which, as I said, is 50% of the addressable market, along with the Me Too products, we also have some products where we were the first to innovate, like an acrylic laminate, a high sheen paint, which can be used both in interiors and in exteriors, and so on. So having developed this rich portfolio of differentiated products, today about 28.5% of our total revenue comes from this portfolio. Naturally, this portfolio yields a much higher gross margin contribution than the regular basket of goods, because there's very little competition here and we get to set the pricing terms. Also, having such products on our hand makes it much easier for us to expand our distribution network, because virtually every retailer would like to have some of these differentiated products to sell, and we can use that as an entry point and then gradually expand our presence at that retail counter. The second bit of our strategy has to do with the way in which we have built our distribution network. Realizing very early that this is a long marathon that has to be approached slow and steady, that is exactly what we did. We entered one state every year over the last 20 years. And whenever we entered a state, we would tell the sales team to concentrate on the small towns and rural areas for the first 4 to 5 years. And only after they had heavily populated the tier 3 and the tier 4 towns were they allowed to gravitate to the larger cities of that state. Always using our differentiated products to get our foot in the door and then elbow our way to expand our product offering depth at that particular counter. Having done this patiently for more than 20 years now, we today have a footprint in 27 out of 28 states in India. Himachal Pradesh is the only state where we are yet to enter. And when I say we exist in 27 states, I mean that you can go to a Mizoram, you can go to an Arunachal Pradesh or Nagaland or a Sikkim or even an Andaman Islands, and you will find a very rich presence of indigo paints in every corner of the country. In general, our presence is very strong in the smaller towns and rural areas, but now we are making a very fast shift into the larger cities. Now, because we have entered states one at a time sequentially, our different states are at different stages of evolution as far as our distribution network is concerned. For example, there is one bucket of states here where we have been present for more than 10 years each. States like Kerala or UP or Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc., where the job of populating the smaller towns and rural areas is by and large done. And now the entire focus is to move into the larger cities where we are getting excellent traction. So if you were to visit cities like a Cochin or a Trivandrum or Calicut or a Patna or a Ranchi or a Kanpur, you will find a very wide presence of Indigo paints there and growing by the day. There is another bucket of states where we have entered maybe 3, 4, at most 5 years ago. And some of these are the largest consuming states of India, states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Telangana. Now, in the last 3, 4 years, the job of populating the smaller towns and rural areas is still work in progress. And the larger cities are, by and large, still a huge untapped potential for them. And then there is the bucket of states, largely in North India, where we have entered very recently. I mean, we entered Jammu and Kashmir 4 months ago. We entered Punjab last year and Uttarakhand the year before that. So in these states, we are at the baby steps of expanding our network, and it will probably take us 7, 8 years before we can build a vast network in these states. So although collectively we have reached a good dealer count of about 11,000 plus as of 31st March of 2020, that is fairly small compared to an estimated 25 to 30,000 each of the number 2 and number 3 players, and in excess of 70,000 active dealers of the market leader. So the good news is that there is huge headroom for us to grow. And it will take us many more years to catch up with the number 2, number 3 players in the depth of our distribution network. And as we grow our dealer network, the sales growth would follow automatically. Let us come to the third element of our strategy on advertising. We have already spoken about the difficulty for a new entrant to create brand equity in a space which has been so inundated with 4 large players. The first thing that we noticed is that all the other larger players have anywhere from 12 to 15 sub-brands within their portfolio. We felt as a new entrant, it would help if we compressed our entire offerings into a single brand name, which is what we did. All our products are virtually offered under the brand name Indigo. And that helps in registering the brand in the minds of the customer. Somewhat similar to the strategy that a great company like Amul has adopted, where it is present in 15 different product categories, starting from milk, butter, cheese, ghee, going on to ice cream, baby food, Shrikhand, chocolates, and whatnot. And yet it uses only one brand name across its portfolio. And it doesn't matter what Amul advertises, the benefit accrues to the entire range. The second thing that we noticed is that all the larger players were only advertising emulsions, either an exterior or an interior emulsion, for many, many years. And one can understand the rationale for it, because emulsions, after all, are 50% of the market size. So again, we felt that if we also try to advertise emulsions, it would be very difficult for us to stand out and be noticed, and there would be a lot of clutter in that space. So instead, in the first 4 or 5 years, we completely focused on advertising our differentiated products. So we would advertise a ceiling coat or a floor coat or a PU enamel or whatnot. And we gained a lot of visibility during that period because no one else was manufacturing it and no one else was advertising it. And therefore, we escaped the clutter in that media. And because the entire portfolio was branded with a single brand name, Indigo, I think we reaped the benefits across the entire product range. About 3 years ago, when we first thought of appointing a brand ambassador, once again, we took a slightly different approach. All the larger players tend to use Bollywood film personalities as their brand ambassadors. And as strong as the brand appeal of a Bollywood personality is, Unfortunately, it is not very strong when it comes to the 5 southern states of India, each of which has its own deeply entrenched film industry and its own superheroes on the celluloid at a regional level. So we wisely chose MS Dhoni because we found that MS Dhoni has a deep connect across the length and breadth of India, which surpasses any regionality, any language barrier. And I think we made a great choice because his presence has really elevated our brand equity to a whole different level. Now, before the start of this conference, I think we were playing some of our TV ads of various differentiated products. These are just some still ads. This is our floor coat that you can create beautiful designs on your driveway with. In all our ads, we use Mr. Dhoni along with an animated zebra with colored stripes because that happens to be the logo of the company. As you can see on every can, our logo is a zebra with colored stripes, merely to indicate that we are very different from anyone else that you can find. This is an ad for our PU enamel, which gives a very high sheen to doors and windows. This is for acrylic laminate, again, a very high sheen paint, which can be used both in interiors and exteriors, and so on. So we have been aggressively ramping up our advertising spends over the last 5-6 years. And in the last fiscal, our total A&P spends were 12.7% of our top line, compared to 3.5% to 5% of the other 4 larger players. So, of course, we have been punching much above our weight as far as advertising spends are concerned. Now, a subset of the A&P spends are the actual media advertising spends, what you actually pay to the TV channels to show your ads. And there we found that in the last fiscal, our total media spends had reached about 62 crores, virtually on parity with that of the number 2 and number 3 players as to what they spend on the media, and much higher than the number 4 player. Of course, much, much less than the market leader, but we are not to duplicate that at this point in time. Now, we feel that now, with this ramp up in the last 5 years, when our media advertising spends have reached parity with companies that are 6 or 7 times larger than us, then we are shouting as loud as them, and we are advertising in 8 different languages across 140 channels in the country. Maybe now we need to, of course, sustain this advertising and keep increasing it, but maybe the future increases in advertising could be a little less aggressive in nature. What I mean is that in the past, in a particular year, if our revenues went up by 30-35%, the ad spends went up by 40%. In future, if the revenues go up by 30 to 35%, maybe the ad spend needs to increase by a more modest 15 to 20%, and that should be fine. Which means that over time, our media spends as a percentage of revenue, not in absolute terms, but as a percentage of revenue, should start showing economies of scale and dropping off a little bit, which obviously would have an impact on profitability. The fourth element of our strategy having to do with tinting machines. Now, as I said, the problem is not so much in the cost of the tinting machines to finance it. I mean, it is capital intensive, but deep pockets could finance that in relatively short period of time. The bigger problem is one of space. And a retailer is not willing to install your machine unless he sees a very strong brand pull coming for that brand. What did we do? Again, innovate. All other companies offer a tinting machine which requires a separate computer to hook into it to power that tinting machine. We are the only ones offering a tinting machine with a built-in computer inside it that requires no external computer to power it. And we have gone about very aggressively promoting these tinting machines. As our brand equity has grown, so has been the acceptance of these tinting machines. And we have reached, as on 30th September this year, a population in excess of 4,600 tinting machines, which is a good number. And most of it has come in the last 3 years as our brand equity has escalated, and adding about 1,200-1,300 per year, hopefully to accelerate in the years to come. So although 4.5 to 5,000 tinting machines is a good number, it pales in comparison to the population of 17 to 20,000 of even the number 2, number 3 players. What to talk of 45,000 plus of the market leader. So once again, huge headroom to continue to grow in this. And as and when a tinting machine is installed, the output of a dealer tends to go up by a factor of 2.5. So this is another vehicle to expand our sales as our tinting machine population improves. Some other strengths that we have, all the other manufacturers, the larger ones, tend to have 9 or 10 manufacturing plants across the country. We have strategically chosen to operate from only 3 manufacturing plants, one in Jodhpur, one in Cochin, and one near Trichy in Tamil Nadu. All the plants are strategically located in very close proximity to the principal raw materials. This reduces our input freight costs and therefore increases our gross margins. However, the flip side of this is that having fewer manufacturing locations, our materials have to traverse a longer distance to reach our depots across India, and therefore our outward freight costs are significantly higher than competitors. But even after adjusting for that, as we will discuss later, I think we still remain competitive from a logistic viewpoint. We have a very unique policy on our human resources. Yes, there are a few key management personnel at the senior levels who are not only highly qualified, but have rich experience in the paint industry. Beyond that, we maintain a very flat organization structure with very, very few hierarchical levels. And at middle management levels, we avoid hiring people with work experience as far as possible. We prefer to take fresh blood straight from the best of institutes, whether it is an MBA institute or an engineering college. Within a few months of joining, we give these bright minds a level of responsibility which they would probably not enjoy for the next 10 to 15 years anywhere else. This leads to a very low manpower attrition rate, close to 0, because this level of responsibility is very addictive and people love working in this environment. They are paid market rates of salary, and added to that is a very high variable pool of remuneration. And once they have proven themselves in a couple of years, we ply them with a huge amount of ESOPs, which vest after 4 years. And on vestment, people have made a few crores of rupees each. And after that, we give them another round of ESOPs, which would vest after another 4 years. So this has been another key strength of us. People work from their heart, not from their head, and they never think about leaving the organization. Some KPIs, our number of depots have been progressively increasing over time. They have gone up further after 31st March. The number of active dealers has been increasing at about 10 percentage points every year. The differentiated products that I spoke about, their share in our overall revenue has also been going up by about 1 percentage point every year. And of course, our tinting machines, as I said, most of it has come about in the last 3 years. I will now jump into the final section of this presentation, which has to do with financial analysis. Our revenue from operations have grown at a very fast clip. It was about 21% increase over the preceding year in FY18, about 33.5% in FY19, and in FY20, where, as I said, everyone was severely impacted first by an economic slowdown and then by the COVID lockdowns in March, it was still a very healthy 16.6. Our EBITDA numbers have ramped up very consistently from 6.5 to about 14.6% in the last fiscal, with a corresponding increase in our PAT numbers from 3.2% to 7.7%. If we look at the first half of this year, which has been most severely impacted by COVID, our revenues in the first half of this year, April to September, has declined by less than 5% from the corresponding period of last year. And our EBITDA margins for the first half of this year have been at 18.5% compared to 8.5% in the corresponding period of last year. If we compare the growth rates across the 5 large paint companies for FY 18, 19 and 20, please bear in mind that FY 18 was a slightly unusual year when the country transited into the GST mode of taxation. So there was a slight change in the way revenue was recognized and reported, and therefore almost all companies have reported a very muted growth in sales in FY 18 over FY 17, but that is more of an accounting aberration rather than any indication of any slowdown. So in Asian Paints went from 1.4% growth in FY 18 to a 12.6% in FY 19, down to 4.9% in the COVID-impacted FY 20. And these are all standalone numbers that I'm quoting from for our competitors. For Berger Paints, the similar trajectory was 2.5% growth, going up to 14% and down to 3.2% growth. For Nerolac, it has gone from 4.5% to 9.2%, down to negative 4.5% last year. And for Akzo, it has gone from negative 3% up to 4.5%, down to almost negative 9% last year. And in comparison, we have gone from 20.7 to 33.4% growth and down to 16.6. If we compare the EBITDA growth across the industry, obviously the highest EBITDA margins are of Asian Paints, which has expanded from around 20% EBITDA in FY 18 to around 22.5% in the last fiscal. Berger has gone from about 15.5 to 16.8. Nerolac has gone a little bit up and down and hovered around the 16% mark. And then Akzo has gone from 10.7 to 14.2. And during the same period, we have gone from 6.4 to 14.6. So even in the last fiscal, our EBITDA margin percentages were pretty much in the same ballpark as an Akzo Nobel or a Nerolac or a Berger, but of course significantly less than the market leader Asian Paints. If we look at the first 6 months of this year and compare it with the first 6 months of last financial year, everybody has shed some top line because of prolonged periods of lockdown. Akzo Nobel has shed about 36% of top line. Kansai Nerolac has dropped by 30%. Berger and Asian have dropped by around 19 to 22%. And Indigo has dropped by only 5%. And the EBITDA margins for the first half of this year are, of course, highest for Asian at 23. Second highest is Indigo at about 18.5, marginally higher than a Kansai or a Berger. Now, this may seem a little counterintuitive. I mean, we are obviously a much smaller company in size compared to these illustrious peers. Operational leverage is yet to kick in a big way. And you would expect that our EBITDA margins would be considerably weaker than the larger players at this point in time. So if we are able to deliver EBITDA margins consistently in the same ballpark as them, there must be some cost advantages that we enjoy. And that is what I will take you through during the next 3-4 slides. The first analysis that we make is of the level of discounts that we offer to the retailer as a percentage of revenue. Now, mind you, the turnover that is reported on the P&L is after subtracting all of these discounts. And that is the norm as per the Ind AS method of accounting. However, usually the quantum of discounts can be discovered in some annexure to the balance sheet. And having done this analysis for the last 3 years, we find that the highest level of discounts are offered by Akzo Nobel, which is represented by this blue line, where the amount of total discounts are about 19% plus of their top line. The next is Asian Paints with this green line, where the number is about 15.8%. Unfortunately, Berger's numbers are not to be found in the balance sheet, and therefore we do not have a comparative comparison for Berger. The lowest seems to be deceptively Nerolac, which is this pink line. However, the problem is that we have, for the purpose of this analysis, divided by the total quantum of discounts has been divided by the total revenue of the company. And we know that only about half or 55% of their revenue comes from decorative paints. If we had access to those exact numbers, we would have divided the discounts by only the decorative portion of their revenue, and this number would have shot up to a much higher number. And Indigo Paints is a flat graph at 11.4%. Now, how is it that a company of our modest size is able to get away with a lower level of discount to the trade, even compared to the market leader? And I think the answer is that about a third of our revenue comes from a very differentiated stream of products where zero discounting is offered by us. And that lowers the average discount percentage for the company as a whole. So this gives us one scope for cost advantage compared to our larger peers. The second is if you look at gross margins and the trajectory over the last 3 years. Now, the lowest seems to be Nerolac at about 38% last year. Slightly higher is Berger at close to 41%. And then Asian Paints at around 45 and Akzo at about 46. And Indigo has been the highest gross margin earner, at least for the last 2 years in a row, where we have been at 48.5. One reason of this is, again, because of the contribution that comes from our differentiated products, which, as I said, offers a much higher proportion of gross margin than the regular basket of goods. But this cannot be explained only with that. Let me take the reverse of gross margin, which is the raw material cost as a percentage of sales, which would be nothing but 100% minus these numbers. So it will be virtually flipping this graph on its head. And if you look at the left-hand side, that is exactly what it is. The raw material cost as a percentage of revenues, where again, the Indigo line is obviously the lowest material cost at 51.5%. As I said, another reason why our material costs are lower, in addition to the higher gross margins afforded by our differentiated products, the second factor is that we have fewer manufacturing locations which are located in close proximity to raw materials. So our inward freight costs are lower. The flip side is that our outward freight costs are much higher than others because our materials traverse a much larger distance to reach the end depot. So I think the sensible thing to do is to add this number with this number and come up with an adjusted cost of material, which is your raw material cost plus your outward freight. And there we find that we are not the runaway leader, but we are almost as low in cost as the industry leader, Asian Paints. And we are about 3.5 percentage points better off than a Berger and about 6% or 5 percentage points better off than a Nerolac. Akzo is, of course, the lowest cost because Akzo, as you may be aware, is primarily in the very premium segment of the paint market, and therefore their gross margins are significantly higher. So this is another space in which we draw competitive advantage in costs, because of which we are able to outspend on advertising and sales promotion, where our numbers as a percentage of top line, as I said, are significantly higher than others. Others are all around the 4-5% mark, whereas we are at 12.7. But as I said, the subset of this A&P spend, which is the media advertising spend, which is what you really need to spend to gain, brand salience, our expenditure last year at about 62 crores was virtually in the same bracket as that of the number 2 and number 3 players and much larger than the number 4 player. And therefore, as I said, in future, the A&P spends should start tapering off as a percentage of revenue, not in absolute amounts by any stretch of imagination. And the last area in which we enjoy a cost advantage comes from the overhead expenses, where the highest overhead expenses seems to be Akzo Nobel at close to 14% of revenue, followed by Berger, then Nerolac, and then Asian. And ours is at about 4% of revenue and drifting marginally lower year after year. So to summarize, before that, just show this comparative graph on return on equity, where this indigo colored line has been sharply ramping up, has crossed 24% in the last fiscal and getting near to the ROE numbers of Berger and Asian and already well past that of an Akzo or a Nerolac, and a very similar conclusion on return on capital employed, where we are getting close to the two market leaders and already surpassed that of the number 3 and number 4 players. So to summarize the cost advantages that we have, A, we need to give lower discounts overall on our gross sales versus our larger peers, primarily because of the contribution that comes from differentiated products, which requires virtually no level of discounting. We have significantly lower cost of material, even after adjusting for the higher outward freight versus many of the peers, partly because of the differentiated products, partly because of having fewer manufacturing locations strategically located. And we have considerably lower overheads compared to our peers, because of which we have been able to sustain much higher A&P spends as a percentage of revenue and still deliver EBITDA margins comparable with companies much larger in size. As far as the objects of the primary portion of the issue are concerned, which is 300 crores, half of it is earmarked for a major expansion at our Tamil Nadu factory. About 50 crores is earmarked for an aggressive increase in the population of our tinting machines across the retail network. A small amount of 25 crores is earmarked for repaying the small amount of debt that we have. And after repaying this, we would be debt-free in the company. And about 75 crores for general corporate purposes and issue expenses. There is a small OFS offering by Sequoia Capital, which before the IPO owns about 39% of the equity of the company. And even after this small stake sale, they will continue to hold 30% approximately in the company. And they tell us that they intend to remain invested for at least another 5 years or so, if not more, and a very small OFS portion by the promoters, after which we would still be left with roughly 55% of the stake in the company. Finally, what do we see ourselves doing in the next 5 years? The strategy that has worked in the past needs to be continued. That is, we keep expanding our portfolio of differentiated products. We relentlessly keep adding to our dealer network, both in small towns and in large cities. We accelerate the adoption of our tinting machine across the retail network. And we continue to advertise with more modest increases in advertising going forward to continue to strengthen our brand. And if we do all of this the way in which we have been doing in the past, I'm very confident that in the next 5-6 years, we will start drawing level with some of our larger peers, at least in the strength of our dealer network, the population of our tinting machines, and the salience of our brand, and be able to deliver profitability numbers with far improved parameters than what we are doing now. And that's all I have in terms of a presentation. Thank you for a very patient hearing. And we would welcome your questions on anything that is left unanswered in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard, for taking us through the presentation. That was very detailed. And of course, your experiences and working towards the common goal of continuing to be a category creator and be the fastest growing decorative paints company in India. We hope the attendees have captured enough and more understanding of Indigo's business model, the financial soundness, and the differentiated product portfolio. Before the floor is open for the participants to ask the questions, I would like to reiterate to type your name and organization details in the Q&A chat box for the moderator to take note and address your query. Note, in the interest of time, we will be restricting the questions to about 20. Repetitive questions will be skipped. Sir, there is a question that has come in saying that, what kind of, cost control, measures that you have taken, in order to survive during the lockdown period.
No, I don't think we did any reduction in cost anywhere. There was not even the slightest amount of retrenchment. Neither did we resort to any salary cuts or salary freeze or anything. In fact, we implemented an increment starting from the 1st of June. We normally do that from 1st of April. This year, we only delayed that by 2 months and did a healthy increment as usual from the 1st of June. Otherwise, costs all remained the same. Of course, during the lockdown periods, largely in April and May, when not much sale was going on, it did not make sense to advertise. And that is normally a period of heavy advertising in the paint industry. So nobody was spending advertising bucks. So that was the only thing that happened as a natural corollary. But otherwise, I don't think we resorted to any kind of a cost saving or a cost cutting measure. It was not required.
Okay, so just briefly, could you narrate the entire journey of you coming into the cement space from the Jharkhand market, and then moving on to acquire the Kerala-based company? I mean, why was the reasons that you made the choices that you made to grow in certain markets? Very briefly, please.
No, I think I already described our journey in some amount of detail very early in the presentation. As far as choice of geography was concerned, as I said, our concept was enter one state in 1 year and focus on that before moving on to another state. So therefore, we avoided a big bang approach of trying to, spread our wings pan-India within 2 to 3 years, which I think would be an unwise move for any new entrant in this sector because of the difficulties that I elaborated upon. We did not have any particular scheme in mind as to how the geography was chosen. I mean, things just happened and they were randomly selected from different parts of India. I mean, I think we started first from West Bengal, then went to Odisha, then went to Bihar and Jharkhand. And, the initial first 3-4 years was mainly in Eastern India. And then suddenly an Andhra Pradesh happened, and soon after that a Kerala happened. So we were not particular about where we go first and where we go next, as long as we went slow and steady. And we knew right from the beginning that the ultimate objective was to have a presence in every corner of India, and it is going to take time to do that. And we were patient enough. And even now there is one state which is yet remaining, which is Himachal Pradesh, which we will leave for the next fiscal. Because this fiscal we have entered Jammu and Kashmir. So that has been the journey as far as our network and geography is concerned. Some geographies pick up a little faster than others, and it's very difficult to ascribe reasons for it. Some states do slowly for some period of time and they suddenly start galloping at a very fast pace. And that's how it has happened.
So what are the top 3 contributing states you have as of now to your revenues?
The number 1 is definitely Kerala because of that acquisition that we did. I mean, in Kerala today, by the way, we are the number 3 player by a very wide margin. The market leader is, of course, Asian Paints. The number 2 player is Berger, and we are not very far behind Berger in Kerala. And we are about twice the size of the number 4 player and maybe 3 times the size of the number 5 player in that state. After that, the next most important states, it would be a toss-up between 5 or 6 of them, between a West Bengal, a Bihar, UP, and now a Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Assam are catching up. A Chhattisgarh and even an Odisha or even Madhya Pradesh are not very far behind. So there are about 7-8 states scattered across India which would compete for the number 2, number 3 slots. And each year that pecking order seems to change a little bit. And that's how it is.
Okay, so there's a question in that, what is the margin difference between your differentiated products and your regular products? Particularly, you can also highlight what the margin is for the PU enamel product.
Now, it will be very difficult to give that level of granular information as to what the specific margin for individual products is. Across the differentiated products itself, the gross margins are not uniform. Neither are they uniform for the non-differentiated products. So I would only answer it qualitatively by saying that overall this basket of differentiated products yields a significantly higher gross margin contribution than the rest of the basket of goods. If you want a top of the hat, rough crude estimate, maybe the difference is as high as 8 to 10 percentage points. Beyond that, to give granular information on individual products, I don't think would be very healthy.
Okay, sir. How is the wood, coatings market doing in terms of growth, and what is the competitive intensity there?
It's a more difficult market. We were very strong in that market in a certain segment in Kerala when we acquired that company. That segment has not grown as fast as the other components of paints. Of course, we have now offered the wood coatings in every part of India, but wood coating is a difficult entry, point, because you're not dealing with painters. You're dealing with an entirely different breed of people who are the polishers. Creating brand equity in that space, we have found, is not very useful. And therefore, you will see that you do not see much advertising by any company in the wood coating sector. It is very in-depth working with the polishers over a long period of time and demonstrating the effect of your products versus the others. We are seeing a lot of very good traction in that segment in a few states in India, but there are many states in India where we still find the going difficult as far as wood coating is concerned. Having said that, please understand that wood coatings by itself is a fairly small segment of decorative paints, around 4% of value.
Okay, so are all your dealers multi-brand or dedicated to Indigo paints only?
Well, not just for us. I think all dealers for any company are multi-brand. It's very difficult to find any retailer in India who is 100% dedicated to one particular brand. So all dealers everywhere are by definition necessarily multi-brand.
Okay, so your advertising and promotion expense, is it going to, be about 12% going ahead also?
No, I'd already mentioned that now in the past they were climbing actually. 2 years ago they were about 11.5 and then they climbed up to about 12.4 and then went up to 12.7. We should see a slight tapering off of that as we go ahead, because as I mentioned, there is no need to increase advertising spends as aggressively as we have done in the past. We will continue to increase them, but maybe not as aggressively as we have done in the past, and therefore there should be some economies of scale kicking in that direction.
Okay, so from a end user perspective, could you give a marker for your products, be it flats versus, selling dwelling units, and metro and, in the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities?
I'm not clear about the question. Are you asking what is the split of our sales between
Correct,
the smaller towns?
Correct, sir.
Okay. Hard to give a very specific quantitative number. And the reason is that there is no hard and fast definition of what constitutes a small town and what constitutes a big town. So that's a very nebulous term to define. Broadly, if you say towns with a population less than 3-4 lakhs and downwards, and those are not necessarily very small towns, but let's say average level towns, I would roughly say that, and don't hold me on these numbers, it's more a qualitative feel that I'm giving you. Maybe about 85% of our sales comes from that category of towns and about 15% from the larger cities and the metros. And by the way, this percentage would be around 55-60% for the largest of companies, because that is where the real demand is. So it is a misnomer that it is the metros and the very large cities which drive the demand in this sector. That is really not borne out by facts.
Okay, so your strategy of having the manufacturing facility next to raw material source of origin is great, but you still have a higher outward freight cost. I mean, is there any way that you can look at a reduction there?
So I think that we analyzed that and said that even after you adjust for the higher outward freight, and we had some graphs to show that, we are still very competitive in terms of logistics compared to much larger companies. So for reasons best known to them, other companies have chosen to have many more plants closer to the marketplace. We find it economical to have fewer plants located at the source of raw materials and transport the finished goods to a longer distance. We find that logistically it makes more sense for us. So we intend for the next 5-6 years to remain at those 3 locations and to grow as much capacity as we want at those locations rather than stepping into more manufacturing locations in different parts of India.
Okay, from a market perspective, for the differentiated products, what has been the acceptance of it in India, and besides the regular products, what does it currently stand at?
How do I define that? I mean, 28.5% of our revenue is coming from differentiated products, and its share in the overall basket is increasing by a percentage point every year. So they're obviously growing at a slightly faster pace than the regular basket. Having said that, it is the other non-differentiated products which are 72% of our sales, and they also need to grow at a much faster pace because that's a bigger portion of the pie. And that is where the tinting machine comes in. Today, about 40% of our dealers have our tinting machine. That number for the number 2 or the number 3 players is probably close to 65%. And for the market leader, it is 90%. So as I said, once a dealer adopts a tinting machine, his throughput on average goes up to a factor of 2.5x of what it used to be. So really getting your tinting machines across the network is one key measure or a means for success. Unfortunately, it is not an easy process, as I said, because of lack of space, and branding and increased branding plays a long role in promoting the acceptance of tinting machines, which is why you continue to do this level of advertising so that there is a strong consumer pull, and that encourages the retailer to adopt your tinting machines at a faster pace.
Okay, so is there any rural market in which you face low competition, especially from the top guys?
Oh, no way. I would never underestimate these larger players. You all know that these are awesome companies and they have built their network over 75 to 100 years. So I do not find any corner or even the remotest village which has been left uninhabited by these players. And therefore, the level of competition in the smaller towns and the rural areas is by no stretch of imagination any different from the level of competition in a larger city. And it would have been very unwise of the larger players to ignore the villages and the small towns, because that is what is driving their top line too. And they know that the bulk of the market and the size of the demand comes from those regions. So they would never ignore any one of those corners.
Sir, in your personal opinion, why did Sherwin-Williams not make it big in India?
I would not want to comment on somebody else, especially a large multinational like that. What happened out there, I'm not privy to internal information. Why they came and why they chose to exit India is something that you will ask people. I will have to ask people more knowledgeable about it. And I don't think I would like to comment on the approach of other companies.
There's a question which asks that, there is a very big difference between your gross revenue as per contracted price and actual revenue of the company for the first half year. What has caused this big difference?
I didn't understand. Pardon, what did you say?
There is a very big difference between the gross revenue as per contracted price and the actual revenue of the company for the first half of this year. What has caused this difference?
Not really. The difference between the gross revenue and the net revenue from operations are the discounts that you offer, which in the past, as I said, has been about 11.4% for our company, which is lower than others. This year, because of softening of raw material prices consistently for more than a year, most companies had stepped up their discounts and schemes for the retail. So that 11.5% for us may have gone up to maybe 13% or something. I don't have the exact number, but that would be the gap that would exist between the gross revenues and the net revenues. I don't think there is any unreasonable gap between the two at all.
Particular to raw materials, there's a question which asks that, I would like to know what is the kind of raw material cost advantage you have due to the three factories, and especially in a place like Jodhpur. Is there any raw material which originates from Jodhpur itself?
Oh yeah, Jodhpur is an excellent place to make paints. You please look at the volume of paints that we make for any paint company. A small item like putty, which may contribute 12 to 15% of value, usually contributes almost half the volume of the paint business. Now, as far as putty is concerned, I don't think you can be at a more advantageous location in the whole country compared to Jodhpur, because the two ingredients that you need, white cement, both the manufacturers in India, Birla White and JK White, are located within a 50 to 70 kilometer radius of Jodhpur. The best quality dolomite comes from that part of Rajasthan, and therefore Jodhpur is an excellent place to make putty. And by the way, amongst the 5 large manufacturers, we are the only one who makes 100% of putty in-house and resorts to zero contract manufacturing, versus the other 4 larger players who make 0% putty in-house and do 100% toll manufacturing. Also, when it comes to making water-based paints, the maximum contribution by volume in terms of raw materials which require transportation are your filler items. And these are your mineral products, dolomite, calcite, china clay, talcum powder, mica powder, and so on. And you may be aware that the southern part of Rajasthan, where Jodhpur is located, along with the northern edge of Gujarat, is the richest belt for these minerals in the whole country, both in quantity, quality, and price. And therefore, for making water-based paints, again, Jodhpur is an excellent manufacturing location, which is why we went to Jodhpur. I mean, we as a company had no other connect with Jodhpur. We went there only because of proximity to raw materials, and I think we made the right decision.
Okay, so one of the biggest differentiators in the paints industry is the painter community. How have you tapped that? We believe that you have a painter incentive program, in the working, and there is a form of action where they take reimbursement of tokens. Could you just throw some light on that?
Very good question. Today, the painter is a very, very important influencer of brand choice. And people tend to believe in what a painter or a painting contractor recommends much more than what the retailer or the dealer may be recommending. So all paint companies necessarily have an extensive painter contact program that they run throughout the year. I mean, that's pretty much hygiene. As far as we are concerned, we also run an extensive painter contact program, but I think our contact program is somewhat different from the others. To the best of my knowledge, most of these painter contact programs for the large 4 companies are run either by some outsourced third-party agency or by some off-roll staff. We run this program by entirely on-roll trained engineers in the company who have been trained at the factory to scientifically demonstrate the quality of our paint versus our competitors. We do about every month, about 500 to 600 such painter contact programs across the country every month. And one necessary feature of each and every one of the programs is a blind test of quality. That means our engineer will go to the counter where whatever 25, 40 painters have assembled, and he will pick a can of our paint from the dealer's counter. He will pick a like-to-like paint of whichever other brand the dealer is stocking. He will mask both the sealed cans with black paper and give the 2 cans to the painters to apply over the next 15 minutes and declare their verdict. And after they declare their verdict as to which paint is better, the 2 cans are unmasked And 100% of the time, they find that they have chosen Indigo as the superior quality product. Now, doing such a blind test 500 times in a month requires a lot of courage, and it requires conviction that your product is indeed much better than competition. And we do that. Along with that, there are tokens that we put, liberal amounts of tokens, perhaps more than our larger peers. And the painter redeems those tokens for cash. We also have a slightly longer term loyalty program for the larger painters or the painting contractors, in which they get a valued gift at the end of the year. Most of these things are followed by other people too. My own experience and observation is that, giving a token or some kind of a financial gratification is a necessary condition. It is not a sufficient condition. Only for financial gratification, no painter will recommend your paint, unless the painter is convinced from his heart that your paint is of very good quality. He hesitates in recommending that paint to someone else, because should a customer be dissatisfied after accepting his recommendation, his business suffers because he survives only on word of mouth publicity. So it is a slow process. Even if we demonstrate this twice, thrice to a painter, please understand that this brand building and demonstration by the other larger players that has gone on for 75, 80 years cannot be overcome in a short period of time. So for everything in this business, the first primary requirement is patience, persistence, innovation. If you keep doing it, you will grow faster than competition, and someday you will get up there along with the big boys. And that has been our approach.
Thank you. So the other question is one with respect to the aggregate capacity that you have at the moment, and the utilization point of view that you will see in FY21. When is your expansion expected to get completed? The document states, it will be commissioned in August, 22. And,
Yes.
Are we on the timeline as of now? Is there any delay expected? Have you accounted?
No, I don't think there is any delay expected. I think we have given the timelines with some buffer in sight, and I think we should comfortably be able to complete the project on schedule. Capacity utilization is a little bit of a misleading number as far as the paint industry is concerned. And the reason is that the business is somewhat seasonal in nature. All paint companies experience a significant drop in sales during the 3 monsoon months of June, July, August. There is a very large peak that comes just before Diwali, but that peak comes largely in the northern part of India. Southern India is not very impacted with Diwali. Another peak comes in the months of March and April, which is really pan-India. And the reason is that that is a time of a year when the weather conditions are most conducive for painting. And also the marriage season in India, which typically falls in the months of May, June, are just around the corner. And today, marriage is a much bigger trigger for painting than festivals. Now, what happens is that during these peak periods, A, pre-Diwali, and B, around March, April, paint demand kind of almost goes up almost 2x. So paint companies are compelled to keep a large amount of overcapacity so that they may be able to service the demand during those peak months. And during the rest of the months, you drop your production levels to meet the available demand. So therefore, for any paint company, if you analyze the average capacity utilization for the year, you will always find a low number. And that is fine. And the way we plan for it is that every year we take a call that let us look for the next 2-3 years. Which product categories are we likely to see a capacity bottleneck 2 years down the road, either in the month of October or in the month of March? The other months are never a problem. And if we see the 2 years hence, and our observation does show that in October 2022, we could be seeing a problem in capacity of water-based paints, especially in the southern part of India. And therefore, we have started building that capacity now so that that capacity comes on stream much before that bottleneck arises. And whenever you build capacity, you never build for October 22. You will overbuild it so that it takes care of the next 1 or 2 years also. So you will always live with that scenario where your capacity utilization for the whole year hovers around 50, 60%, and you still feel the need to keep adding capacity relentlessly. And that is, I think, a phenomena that you will observe across all paint companies.
Sir, you fairly moved into the Bombay Delhi markets. How is the brand performing in the current market situation?
We don't yet have a depot in Delhi. We have started making inroads into Delhi from our Ghaziabad depot, which is located just across the river in UP. Bombay, we do have a depot out there. As I said, quite understandably, the acceptance rate in a metro is going to be slow. It is going to be the last bastion that will crumble. So although we have started there, the focus at the moment in the country is more on the tier 1 towns, the non-metros. So, the focus is on a Pune, on an Aurangabad, on a Nagpur, on a Patna or a Kanpur or a Cuttack or a Bhubaneswar or a Visakhapatnam or Ahmedabad. So let us first tackle those. As I said, you have to go in a bottom-up approach. You start from the very small towns and rural areas. Then when you have done a good job there, you move into a district headquarter town, which for the purposes of familiarity with Maharashtra, let me say, you start attacking a town like an Akola or a Kolhapur or a Sangli or a Latur. And after you have done a good job there, then you move into an Aurangabad or a Nagpur and or Pune. And it is not that you suspend any activities for a Mumbai or a Delhi, but you start making feeble efforts there. And you know that that will take a longer time. So yes, we are getting good traction both in Delhi and in Mumbai. But what share of the overall market do we have in those cities? It will be very, very low.
Okay,
and
so
that is something that we understand.
Right, sir. Does the company have any backward forward integration plans, which will, for example, large players like Asian Paints is going into the home decor space. So, is there any plans at Indigo's end?
You asked both about backward and forward. Let me answer both of them. As far as backward integration is concerned, we have no intentions of manufacturing the raw materials for paints, which 3 out of the large 4 manufacturers do. AkzoNobel, by and large, does not do it and purchases it from outside, much in the same way as we do. It is our collective feeling, and I am no one to talk about what the others do. It is our collective feeling that the value add component in manufacturing the raw materials for paints, which are all commodities, the value add component is fairly low. There is huge excess capacity existing inside the country by huge players, both domestic and multinational, like take emulsions. You have people like Dow and BASF who have set up huge plants which are underutilized in capacity, and many large other Indian players who have set up even larger plants. And the same thing is true for plastic containers, for metal containers, or various other raw materials. And we feel that we are not really in the business of making each one of those raw materials. Our primary focus is to understand the consumer's needs for paints and to deliver and market paints properly. The backward integration, I think those commodities are better manufactured by people who excel in those industries. And I think we are able to purchase those items from them at no higher cost than our competitors who manufacture it in-house. That is my perception. I may be wrong. I reserve the right to be wrong. When it comes to forward integration of offering painting services, that is something that some of the larger players have definitely offered. You will notice that these services are by and large restricted to maybe 20, 30 large cities of India. It is very difficult to scale this kind of an operation to the hinterland, to thousands and thousands of towns, because ultimately you have to deal with an outsourced external person whom you are placing your brand in their hands. And that can cut both ways if you expand it too much. Now, today, our presence in these 25, 30 large cities in itself is slightly low, as I said. And it'll take a few more years before we strengthen ourselves in these big cities, when even thinking about offering a painting service becomes a viable thought option. At the moment, when most of our sales comes from the smaller towns where these services are not offered and really cannot be offered, there is no point in thinking about that in the intermediate term.
Okay, so another thing is that, this is an oligopolistic market and, it is a Me Too space. And how difficult is it for, the competitors to, get into manufacturing differentiated products as you and, start eating to whatever market share you already have?
It's not that they have not thought of it, and it's not that they have not tried. Now, typically what happens, Lalit, is that when we launch any one of these differentiated products, none of them become a runaway hit on the first day. They take 4 or 5 years before they gain traction and before the larger players even start noticing these products. As we discussed about our advertising strategy, our strategy has been to choose and advertise only these differentiated products. So by the time the larger players think of jumping into that space, we have so heavily advertised these innovative products that we find that these products have almost become synonymous with Indigo paints. So even large players, when they do decide to enter at a later date, find that the going is very, very difficult to gain acceptance for their brand of a Me Too product, which is a Me Too product for them. The second thing to understand is that if any one of these products is offering, let's say, a 50 crore, 60 crore, 70 crore top line contribution to us, that 60, 70 crores is very meaningful for a company of our size. It may not be as meaningful for a large player like an Asian or a Berger. And therefore, although there have been cases when they have attempted to imitate these products, found the going tough, and they've generally abandoned this and returned to their playground, which probably makes sense for them. So you have to understand that what is good for an Asian or a Berger is not necessarily good for a company of our size, and vice versa is also true. What is good for us is not necessarily good for a very large player who operates in an entirely different zone of operation. So in the past, we have never had difficulty in protecting our turf as far as these differentiated products are concerned.
Okay, so are you planning to expand into any other country?
None at all. When this country offers such huge potential to potentially grow by a factor of 20x, why would we even dream at this point in time of going into a Bangladesh or a Sri Lanka or a Nepal or anywhere else? I think we are very happy in India, and we intend to remain only in India for a very long period of time.
So could you give some insight on, how is the pricing scenario in the industry right now? Is it like a key point on which, the sales happen? Is it the pricing plays a very big...
No, I don't think that paints is something that can be sold by reducing prices. And the reason is that, paint is not an everyday purchase commodity. So to that extent, it's very different from a toothpaste or a soap or a shampoo, where the housewife has to balance her household budget by those purchases, where price could play an important role depending upon the level of income of the family. Paint is something that you buy once in 5-6 years. And the labor cost of getting the painting done is more than the cost of paint itself. So typically the actual cost of paint is only 40% of the overall painting cost. So therefore, and today painting of a house has become more of a status symbol. It's a calling card of the consumer. It shows to his neighbors as to who he is and where he or she has arrived. And therefore we have found that people do not tend to buy a paint because it is 5% cheaper than others. They are more likely to buy a paint which could be 5% more expensive than others if they feel it is of better quality, because the ultimate delta that it creates on their overall painting cost is fairly small. So I don't think that anybody tries to use a lower pricing as a strategy to gain market share, because I don't think such a strategy would work at all in the first place.
Okay, so your focus is going to continue on residential, or are you looking to move into the industrial paint space too?
No, again, when the decorative paint industry is offering such a huge potential of growth, there is no desire or intention, at least for the next 5-7 years, to foray into adjunct areas of either industrial paints or automotive paints, or what some of the larger players have done, getting into the waterproofing chemical space, etc. Again, as I said, what's good for them is not necessarily good for us. We'll remain focused on what we understand, and there is so much scope for growth in this sector that at this point in time, there is really no benefit in looking left and right into other people's spaces.
Okay, so is there any recurring R&D cost does the company have?
Very small. There is no rocket science involved in making paints. The real science is an understanding the unmet needs of the customer. And that is the greatest challenge. And that is where we think we excel in, because, understanding the consumer's mindset and what these gaps are is not a subject that I think can be delegated to middle management. And so we follow a policy, both Mr. Suresh Babu, who's sitting on my left, who's a chief operating officer, and even myself, we do travel to all the depots quite frequently. And we not only spend a lot of time with the entire sales force, but we also spend time going around the market and visiting the retailers. And we are not just talking to the retailer, we make it a point to talk to the shop assistants of that retailer. And those are the people who really give us the insights. We try and attend some of these dealer contact programs that we conduct every year, so that we hear the direct voice of the painter. And those are the things that give us the insights which create all these bright ideas for these new differentiated products. And once you have got the right idea, to work backwards and create a viable product with that does not really require any sophisticated R&D. And our fairly small team, both located in Jodhpur and at Cochin, has been eminently capable of churning out whatever product or whatever specification we have asked for without any great significant expenditure.
Okay, so two separate questions, but I'll ask it since it's brief in nature. What is your institutional sales contribution, and what are your average working capital days?
Institutional sales contribution is simple. It is a simple number, which is 0. We by and large stick to the retail business. As far as the working capital cycle is concerned, the average working cycle of the company is one of the lowest in this business, which is, I think, 23 days. And that's a very healthy number compared to all the players. The net working capital is 23 days. And that, from the figures that I have, at least for FY20, is the lowest in this industry, at least in comparison with the top 5 players.
Okay, there's a question asking that, why are you looking to sell the stake as a promoter?
I'm not selling my entire stake or a majority portion, but a very valid question. And I think you can extend that question to say, why only am I selling a part of my stake? Why is Sequoia selling some of the stake? Well, Sequoia has been invested in us for about 6.5 years now. It is a venture capital firm. There are limitations on how long it can remain invested, but they tell us that they can remain invested for a significantly longer period as of now. But some point in time, we are duty bound by our agreement to give them an exit route. And the best way of giving them an exit route is by an IPO. So when we thought of an IPO, our merchant bankers, 3 of whom are represented on this screen that you see, convinced both us and Sequoia that if you have to go for an IPO, you need to make it of a certain meteor size so that the large marquee investors across the globe take interest in it. If you have a very small sized IPO, then the larger marquee investors who are there across the globe are not interested because it is too small an offering for them to dabble into. And therefore, they said that to protect the future growth of this industry, of the company, and to have people who provide long-term support to the company and to the share price, you need to have an issue which is meatier enough for them to bite into. And therefore, with great persuasion, we have managed to persuade Sequoia to sell whatever they are selling. As I said, even after that, they will continue to hold 30%. And the bankers felt that that was not good enough. So we pitched in with a small contribution from our side. As I said, even after this, the family will own close to 55%. So all of this is being done in an incremental manner just to make the issue size a little healthier so that the larger investors could take interest. And that is the quality of investor that we would like to attract onto our cap table.
Okay, so with respect to the dealers, are you expecting, the dealer addition to, continue its existing trajectory, or you're looking at it, growing at a 20% year on year? As well as another question states that, are you looking to, restrict yourselves to selling physically, or are you looking to also go online and start selling your products?
Okay, two very different questions. Let me take them one by one. As far as dealer expansion is concerned, we would like to grow at a much, much faster pace. And recently, we came up a few months ago with a different incentive program for our sales force to incentivize not the end product of sales, but to incentivize the rate at which dealers are expanded with various considerations. And that seems to be working extremely well. So the intent is to grow the dealer population much, much faster than what we have been doing in the past. And also along with that, to grow the tinting machine population much faster than what we have done in the past. Secondly, as far as online sales is concerned, paint is a product which is not very amenable to it. And the reason is that you are selling colors. The shade that you see on your mobile or on a laptop screen or on a PC, that color would look completely different from one brand of mobile to the other. It will also look very different from one model of the mobile to the other. So unfortunately, the technology of LED screens and mobile screens and laptop screens and PC screens have not evolved to an extent where there can be any uniformity in the depiction of the color on these screens. And therefore, if a customer selects a color or a shade based on what he or she sees on a mobile or a laptop, and what he's delivered with can be entirely poles apart. And therefore, I think that as far as paint sale is concerned, unless technology develops much further to standardize this, we are committed to sell in the physical route through the retail network, where the person would like to physically see the color on a swatch card before he or she decides to buy the paint.
Okay, so one more question coming in, and we'll of course close with, the last question is that, why such a aggressive pricing, in comparison to your, already listed players out there? Could you just justify the premium valuation that is at ask?
I would let the BRLMs answer that question. Before I pass the mic to them, I will only say qualitatively that, whether the pricing is aggressive or it is conservative is a matter of perception. And obviously, these activities are done and the market recognizes not past multiples, but projections of multiples in the future. The BRLMs have done their study in depth, not only working with our team, but I think they've had extensive interaction with investors, both domestically and across the globe. And they have come up with a valuation which, in everybody's opinion, is the right price, given all the parameters of a company, which leaves considerable margin for the investors, not only investors who come in at the IPO, but perhaps investors who come in shortly after the listing at significantly higher prices to still make money. And how and why the pricing is what it is, let me ask one of the BRLMs to take that call and justify. Who would like to go? Mr. Satyan or Sumit, or who would like to speak?
I can speak and Sumit or Abhijit can add. No, I think, Hemant, as you rightly pointed out, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've, as we normally do, we've gone through an extensive book building process. We've met with multiple investors, taken their feedback. So it's been, the normal typical exercise that we do with investors. And there's been a lot of grounds of feedback that has been taken. And this is again investors across, not just one type, but across the entire spectrum. So it's a mix of mutual funds, FIIs, insurance companies, sovereign funds. It's a mix of all of that. So they basis their feedback, this price has been arrived at. I would like to add, I think, two more parts to this. And, one is that we must not forget that the growth rate that the company has had, has been far superior to its entire peer set. And we've, kind of had mention of that in the presentation that we shared just now on screen. Hemant took us to the last 3-year data for each of those companies. Plus, in our DRHP, I think on slide on page 149 or something, we've again given the comparative numbers for growth rate for on the revenue side for competition versus us. And if you see for us in the last 10 years, on a 10-year basis, also the company has grown at a CAGR of 40% plus. So that is one element. The other part I wanted to highlight was, see, given the company is in high growth phase, trailing multiples from a pure profitability perspective does not necessarily always reflect the true picture. And, we would not be in any position to, give any forward-looking statements. But, that is what I would say. And, Sumit or Abhijit, if you guys would like to add.
So, see, I would like to add just one more point to what Satyan said. What he said about growth, of course, is visible to all, that it has been a very, very fast growth in comparison to some of the larger peers. And in the presentation also, we compared or across parameters how company has been doing favorably. But to add to one more point, that company at this stage of the cycle is still at a much lower base than some of its larger peers, which basically means that the potential for growth in future is also much, much higher. So when trying to evaluate, when investors, so many investors have been met across the 3 BRLMs, we have met large FIs, we have met large domestic investors. I think this is a very, very important factor in their mind when they see not only what they have done in the past, but what the company has the potential to do in the future. And that is one fundamental reason why pricing and how multiples are decided. And that's why future in this case is far, far more important than what the company has done, even though company has completely outperformed its larger peers in the parameters in the past. So I think future in terms of base and in terms of potential of growth is very critical.
And just to add, I think it's a very differentiated story as compared to the other players.
Abhijit, we can't hear you.
It's a very differentiated story that we're presenting here, and that also has been appreciated well. And you will see, when you will see the anchor book performance, all of that will be visible to you about the confidence that investors are reposing, on this company. At the proposed valuations.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Jalal. Last 2 questions before we close, and whatever unanswered questions are there, my dear attendees, we will look at responding back to you. Why?
Certainly.
Sir, why did you choose Mahendra Singh Dhoni as a brand ambassador?
As opposed to whom? Jasprit Bumrah or Ashwin? Who did you have in mind? Come on, that man is worth his weight in gold. See, when we chose Mr. Dhoni, and this was in early 2018, we knew that he's on the last leg of his journey as an international cricketer. But I don't think we were looking at Dhoni or Mahi, as we call him. We weren't looking at Mahi, the cricketer. We were looking at Mahi, the human being, and the kind of personality that he is. And what a fit he is to our brand. He's also that story of a guy who came from a small town like Ranchi out of nowhere and made it to the Super League and one of the greatest cricketers of all times. So in some sense, we felt that his journey in a very oblique way kind of mirrored our rise. Of course, we can never match the levels that Mahi has crossed. The other is his personality. Having risen to such great heights, the humility that the man has, the coolness that he possesses, you'd be surprised that when I have traveled the length and breadth of India after his appointment and after his ads, the advertisements hit the screen, the love that the Indian public have for him is amazing. It is something that I had not known the degree to which he is admired as a human being. And all I can say from personal experience is that whatever you see on the TV screen, with whatever interviews he may have given through his entire career, in real life, he's even better as a human being. He's such a wonderful person to deal with. And today he may have retired for international cricket. He may play IPL for, I don't know, 1 or 2 more seasons. It's in his mind to decide when his body will give up. But we intend to continue with him for a very long period of time, because I think the connect that people have with him is just excellent. And that connect is not confined to any region. You know, people in Assam love him. People in Punjab love him. People in Gujarat love him. And of course, in Tamil Nadu, he's God as the captain of CSK. So he's worth his weight in gold. And we have a very intimate relationship with him. And there is no intention to move to another brand celebrity in the foreseeable future.
Thank you. So just ending it with the last question is, of course, taking into consideration your agility and the way at which you are running the organization, do you have any succession plan at play?
I'm a young man, Lalit. I'm only 63 years of age. Why are you talking about succession so early? Jokes aside, I think we have a very, very competent and loyal second rung of command. Our CFO, Chetan, has been with us since the company started. He joined us in 2001. Suresh, our CEO, has been around for a very long time also with the group, and so on and so forth for the entire team going down. Everybody, as I said, our manpower attrition rate has been virtually zero. So all our unit heads in manufacturing have been around for 18, 20 years or thereabouts. They have grown into the company. They've all joined as youngsters and have reached the position that they are in. And so too with the middle management everywhere. So we don't feel stressed in terms of delegation of responsibility. The entire day-to-day decisions are already taken by the second line of command. I'm really not involved in any of that. I'm only involved in some strategic thought processes to change the direction of the company off and on. As far as family is concerned, I have a son. He's 33 years of age. He was living in the US for the last 14 years, where he went for his education. He's a qualified engineer from the USA and did his MBA from Yale. And he was working with McKinsey in New York for several years. And it is just 3 months ago that he has left all that and returned to India. We propose, and there is a statutory cooling off period. A person has to be a resident of India for a minimum of 6 months before we can even induct him into the board, which we'll probably do once he completes 6 months in India. But there is no intention to foist him in a leadership position in the near future. Our thinking is that, let him learn the business slowly. Let him take charge of a few initiatives. Let him earn his spurs and earn the respect of the team. And let him gradually grow inside the organization. And there is plenty of time for that. God willing, I would like to work for at least another 12 years. More, if possible. I'm a workaholic and I enjoy the office. And by the way, we don't work from home. We have been working from office right from 20th of May in full force. And everybody in the team enjoys coming to office and, they don't like sitting at home and working from there. So that is the kind of spirit that we have. And, succession planning is not something that is uppermost in our mind, but we understand the concerns of the investors, and it is something that has crossed our mind. And I think we are well prepared for it.
Thank you. So we'll end it on that colorful note. Thank you, everyone, for showing interest in knowing more about the company, its leadership, and its future potential. I would now like to call upon Mr. Sumit Bagri to make the closing speech before we close today's webinar.
Thanks, Lalit. Thank you, sir, for taking us through the presentation and key drivers, its insights of the business. Given the company's strong positioning, we hope that this issue will see a blockbuster response from the investors. Indigo Paints is the fifth largest company in the Indian decorative paints industry in terms of revenue, and the fastest growing by far amongst the top 5 paint companies in India. I would like to thank all of you for attending this meeting and sharing your thoughts with us. We look forward to your support for making this issue a huge success. At the cost of repetition, just to summarize on the issue, the IPO consists of fresh issue of equity shares aggregating to 300 crores and an offer for sale up to 58,40,000 equity shares. The price band is INR 1488 to INR 1490 per equity share of face value of rupees 10 each. The IPO opens for subscription on 20th of January 2021 and closes on 22nd January 2021. Thank you very much for attending this meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bagri. Esteemed audience, we've now come to the end of the webinar. We look forward to your participation and support on making this initial public offering a great success. Wishing you all a great day and keep safe.